Today we're going to do Bird is the Word Part 2. So you might remember that before we were talking about primates, we talked about birds. And I love birds so much that I thought this class could go for more than one session. So today we're going to do number 2. We're going to do our normal introduction for our new friends. We're going to talk about behavior and specifically communication. And then we're going to go through our activities, and I'm going to give you some extra resources if you want to learn more. So for our friends that have always been here or have been for almost all the classes, you guys know this, but my name is Megan, and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom. So I work at scientist.com, and that probably means that I work with your mom and dad, or that your moms and dads maybe are clients of mine or something like that. And so I have started these classes because I have a background in science and I really love to teach. So I like to share things with you guys, and that's why we're doing that today. And we're chatting because you're all still out of school. I don't think anybody's going back to school before the end of the year, and your moms and dads are still working just like me. I happen to have taken today off, which is really exciting for me, but usually I would be working and also trying to help kids with school, and so that's a lot to do. So I'm hoping to help out with that because you guys all still need to learn. So today we're going to be talking about behavior, and behavior really just means things that animals do. So it covers really everything that they do, but today we're going to focus specifically on communication between birds. So behavior can cover, their feeding, the way that they court each other, the way that they migrate or flock together, or maybe even fight. So there's lots of different things that encompass or include behavior, or are included in behavior, but we're going to focus on communicating today. So there's a couple different kinds of communication that I want to focus on. Vocal, which is using your voice, and visual, which uses your eyes. So vocal communication, as I mentioned, uses voice or sound in our ears to receive that sound. And birds actually have an interesting way of communicating vocally. So in humans, you can see on the left-hand side here, we have something called a larynx. And the larynx and that coupled with like my tongue and my lips are what I'm using to make sound and communicate with you right now. But birds don't have a larynx like we do. They have something called a syrinx. And their syrinx is actually really kind of specialized. So it branches off into two different directions. So our larynx is really kind of one part of our pipe that goes down from, our trachea and through our larynx and into our lungs. But the bird has these two different kind of forks in it. And that means that they can make much more complex sounds than we can, because they basically have two different parts of their voice box. So there's a specific kind of bird called a songbird, and they have a really specialized adaptation that allows, this specialized adaptation allows them to make this huge range of sounds. And songbirds have been very successful with evolution and competition and things. They actually make up almost half of the bird species in the world. So there's about 10,000 bird species, and about half of them make these really specialized songs. So the vast majority of the ones that are not songbirds have really simple kind of non-specialized sounds that they make. So I want to play one for you here. So let's see if we can go to my first little video thing. This is a wood thrush. So remember how I said the syrinx has the two branches? It means they can make multiple sounds at the same time. And I'm hoping you'll be able to hear this here. So it's actually really difficult for humans to be able to mimic these sounds, because the birds are actually making two different sounds at once. So as humans, we can kind of know about the sounds and we can try to imitate them, and we can actually try to memorize them as well, but it's very different. It's very difficult. So I actually am not very good at learning bird songs. I know a few very specific ones, but there are people who do what's called birding by ear. So if you remember, I talked about birding being like bird watching and going to look for them. There are people that can recognize lots and lots of different bird songs just from the sounds that they make, even if they don't see the bird. I am not one of those people. I wish I could be, but if you're interested in learning bird songs, there are quizzes and videos and things you can watch and listen to online to try to learn bird songs. So next, those songs actually are used sometimes to mark out territories. So a territory is like an area that you kind of claim as your own, right? So your bedroom might be your territory in your house, sort of. And birds, when they sing, they're expending energy, right? So it takes energy to be able to make songs and to sing really loud for everyone to hear. So they do that energy even though it takes up a lot of energy, they need to do it to protect their territory. And they're basically telling everybody else, hey, this is my house, get out, get out. Or, you know, this is my bird feeder. So there's a lot of different ways that birds kind of defend and define their territory, but the songs are really important. And so you can see here, this is actually a song thrush. And there's been lots of different studies that have been done, and people do this all the time, where they map out their territories. So they'll listen to a bird singing, and it might be in the center here. And they'll keep going around where they can hear that specific bird singing, and then figure out where they run into another bird that's singing. And so the birds' territories might really closely overlap, like they do in some of these examples, or they might be kind of far apart. So the bird actually spends a lot of time kind of drifting around in its own territory and calling. And not only does that help them keep their area kind of marked for them to tell other birds that that's their spot, but it also can attract other and impress other birds because they know that, wow, this bird is singing really loud and it has a big territory, it must be really healthy. Because if a bird isn't healthy and is not getting like enough to eat, it doesn't have the energy to go do all those things. So birds also, their songs can be visualized by us. So this is called a sonograph. And this is how we, as humans, kind of visualize their songs. So we're kind of recording them and seeing, and basically we make an image of what that sound looks like, which sounds kind of silly to us, but it's a really good way to track different parts of the song. So there are also things called calls. And calls are not very complicated. Songs are like, it would be like listening to a song on the radio versus someone shouting out, hey, this is my house. It's a very different level of complexity or how complicated it is. So we can see here in this call on the left, it's just two little notes that happen. So kind of each blip there is part of the call. And so, you know, this call, as you can see, is almost all the same, and it's just repeating. And it's an alarm call, which means that they're warning other birds of something bad that's going on in the territory. So maybe there's a predator or, you know, there's a hawk or something coming. So they're alerting other birds. But when they do their song, you can see there's different, what we call phrases or parts of the song. And they might have a pretty little flourish at the end, or they might have a trill, which is like a series of notes that kind of are ascending together or going up together. And these calls are actually pretty complicated, or the songs are pretty complicated and a lot longer usually, and the calls are just kind of short little blips. And each species or each type of bird has a variety of songs and calls that they use in different ways to make up what we call their repertoire. So the repertoire is all of the sounds basically that they make. And the distinction between the songs and the calls isn't always very clear, but a lot of times it can be really interesting to know different calls and songs because birds make different sounds at different times and for different reasons. So they're also capable of making very, very complex sounds. So when you hear a bird singing, usually it's a male because it's having long, complex vocalizations, and it's kind of saying like, hey, look at me, I'm pretty good looking for a bird. And it's telling the other females in the area also that it's, you know, handsome and healthy, and it's telling the males to kind of get out of here because this is my area. So remember how I told you they have the syrinx, which kind of allows them to make these really complex calls. Well, some birds can switch around between the sides that they're singing from without even stopping to take a breath. And it's pretty amazing because they can be making these multiple sounds, they can switch back and forth, and they can even mimic some pretty amazing bird songs. So I'm going to play you part of this video, and this is really old, so it's kind of grainy, but this is Sir David Attenborough and a really cool special he did about birds. And this is the lyrebird. So listen to some of the sounds this guy makes. Sounds, and also learning about sounds from other birds, which I find to be very fascinating. Sometimes birds like this will learn songs or sounds from things that aren't even other birds. So they might be able to mimic a camera shutter clicking or a car alarm or other things that they hear. And they'll repeat all of those sounds as a way to attract females to their area and to show them how strong and smart and fancy they are, which I think is pretty interesting. Yes?
That bird, some of his tweets and chirps and stuff sounded kind of like a Star Wars droid.
Yeah, maybe they got the sounds for the Star Wars droid from the Lyrebird. So these birds that are making these complex noises, they have to learn them from somewhere, right? So some birds hatch and they know their songs that they'll sing as adults, but true songbirds, like we talked about before, it's almost half of all the birds, they have to learn those songs, and they actually learn them from their parents or from like kind of a tutor. So they start to learn them while they're still in the nest. So in this illustration, you can see the little baby birds in the nest are listening to the mom and the dad birds sing their songs. And there's a kind of a critical period when they're in the nest when they have to listen to the adults around them and learn to sing. So after they fledge or leave the nest, they will copy the noises that they've heard, and they will keep practicing until they match the song of the adults. So there are also, you know, as I mentioned, there are some kinds of birds like mockingbirds, catbirds, things like that, that can mimic sounds of other species like frogs, or catbirds kind of mimic cats. They sound like a cat meowing almost, or, you know, even the shutter clicking or a car alarm. So this still is from a really cool TED Ed video about how songbirds know their songs. And I'll put that in the resources for you guys to watch if you're interested, because it's pretty cool. So you might remember how I mentioned before that we use these sonograms to visualize how the birds are singing. So when we're doing this visualization, you can actually see the differences that might be hard for us to hear, because birds can sometimes sing in ranges that we can't even hear with our ears. So one of the cool things about being able to visualize that is we can see differences in bird songs really easily, even if we can't really hear the difference. So this particular bird is a white-crowned sparrow, and that lives in Puget Sound. So this one is on the coast of Oregon and California, and this is all the same species of bird, but even though they're the same species, birds in different areas up and down the coast have different dialects. So a dialect it means you're speaking the same language, but you might have some regional differences. So they can probably kind of understand each other, but there are some differences. And so in this example, you can see the birds up here are singing song number 2, and then it starts to go into song number 7, and then there's song number 1 and 12 and 11, and it's changing. So it changes because of the region that they're in. And some of these variations come when populations are separated. So if you remember when we talked about evolution and population variation and how they move and sometimes will change, songs can change in a very similar way. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is visual communication. So there are some really interesting kinds of visual communication, and animals often communicate that using some adaptations that they have that are structural, so meaning they're kind of part of their body, right? So some of the examples of this are the bright yellow of the bird in the middle, the American goldfinch. And an adaptation that's part of the structure of an animal that they use to communicate with someone else is called a badge. So if you guys are in maybe Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, you might have a badge on your sash that communicates to someone else that you have completed a certain task. And animals are kind of using some of their colors as the same way. So the badges can help the females to pick a healthy male, or they can, you know, let it know that maybe this bird isn't doing so great. So when birds are really bright, when their feathers are really bright, when they're healthy, that means that the bird is healthy as well. So you might remember we talked about feathers and molting. When the feathers get kind of old and raggedy and the bird kind of pushes those out and grows new ones, Well, a bird that's not healthy can't spend the energy to molt very effectively. So they might not look as bright and as crisp as another bird. So on the left here, we have a western bluebird, and you can see it's displaying a beautiful blue color. And then on the right is a scarlet tanager. And these actually do exist in the US. I don't think they exist in the EU. So sorry, Carmen and Inez, but you guys might have some similar or even cooler birds to look at. So they're showing their health through these badges. They can also use visual communication to signal to other birds. And signaling means that they're sending information kind of between them. They're using visuals in their eyes to communicate something. So signaling behavior means that the sender of the information and the receiver usually are both getting a benefit from it. So they're both gaining information or knowledge. So those usually have to go together. And in this case, we see an egret who is signaling with some very beautiful and very specialized wispy feathers there that he is looking for a mate. And the same thing with the frigate bird on the left. So he's inflating that big old air sac to kind of show the females like, hey, look how bright and healthy I am. So they're both sending information, and then other birds are seeing that and receiving information. So it's almost like they're holding up a sign to other birds. So a lot of times I should mention, they use that along with vocal communication. So they might be doing a visual kind of dance maybe, but they might also be vocalizing while they're doing it. So it's kind of like dancing and singing at the same time. Birds can also use signaling to talk to their human caretakers, which I think is really interesting. So just like you guys might know visual behaviors from your dog or your cat or your pig when they do certain things, or are in a certain posture, you might know something about how they're feeling. Well, birds can also use posturing and communication, visual signals to communicate with their caretakers and not just other birds. So in this example, we have a macaw, and you can see the crown feathers on its top, and then the nape feathers kind of under its chin, and on the feathers on the cheek. It's using those feathers to signal something to its caretaker. So you can see they're kind of ruffled up. Oh, I'm sorry, the nape is on the back of the neck, but they're ruffling their chin feathers as well. So you can see they're kind of puffed up. And so they might be having a certain feeling right then, or they might be blushing. You can see, they're a little bit red and their feathers are all puffed up. And so they might be using that to signal to their human caretaker that maybe they're interested in something, or maybe they're scared. It's a theory right now that nobody has been able to definitively prove. So, but it's still a really interesting one that humans can kind of use these visual signals as well. Signaling is also done by baby birds. So this one I think is especially interesting. So where birds are cared for by their parents as babies, so birds that aren't precocial, you might remember that word from before. Precocial birds hatch and they're kind of good to go, right? Well, other birds, like these ones, have to be taken care of by their parents. So they might not have any feathers, they can't feed themselves, they can't really do anything, kind of like human babies. They really need their parents, right? And so in those species, the chicks have evolved some signals that maximize their ability to be fed. So basically, they've figured out how, or they haven't really figured it out, but they've evolved a way to get more attention and more food from their parents. And a lot of that is vocalization, the little cheep, cheep, cheep. Some of it is postures that they use to kind of beg from their parents, which, so in the top left here, you can see the birds are making lots of noise for their moms to come feed them. This one has a posture where it's begging for food from its parents, or they can use bright mouths, actually. This guy, and this up close, looks a little crazy, but it's actually a Gouldian finch. And that baby has a super brightly patterned and colored mouth because it encourages the parents to come and feed them. And so as the species was evolving, the babies that had bright mouths were more likely to be fed and more likely to be healthy, which means they're more likely to reproduce and have babies that also have these crazy looking bright mouths. And this bird in particular, we have lots of pictures, good pictures of the baby's face because they're often raised to be pets. And so people hand raise them sometimes. And so we have really good close-up pictures of their mouths. So the other thing that they can do with visual communication is have pretty elaborate displays. So visual communication can be simple as a brightly colored feather pattern, or a healthy looking feather, or maybe that pouch that I showed you on the frigate bird, but it can be as elaborate as super fancy dancing. So I'm going to show you this crazy fancy dance that this bird called the red-capped manakin does. And I think you guys might think this is pretty funny. So make it big for you.
Of a singles bar. A branch serves as the dance floor.
So if you can see, he's flipping directions, he's kind of moonwalking.
The act isn't all snazzy steps.
And birds like that can develop really, really fancy dances and really fancy noises to go along with it. So they actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It was a bit laggy for me.
Oh, sorry.
It was just moving from place to place.
Okay, so what he's actually doing is he's moving his little feet super fast. So you can't even really tell that he's moving his legs. It kind of looks like he's just sliding up and down the branch. And I've shared that video with you guys in the resources so you can see. But he's also flipping around and doing some pretty special things to get the attention of females and show them how great he is. So with that, we're going to go into our activities today. And for little kids, you guys have a lot of different options, as always. For pictures you can draw a bird doing a signal, or any kind of signal. You can draw a colorful bird, or you can draw a bird singing, and you may choose to draw some notes or a visualization of the song with it if you'd like. Big kids can draw a picture of a bird displaying and explain what they're doing. You can make a comic about how birds communicate, or you can write a few sentences about why they communicate. For middle schoolers, you can write a paragraph explaining why birds communicate and how they communicate. You can draw your own diagram of the bird's syrinx and explain why that's important, or you can create a comic about bird communication and how they communicate. So as always, you guys know you can email your homework to me, and the company I work for, Scientist.com, is sponsoring a $10 Amazon gift card for the winner of our drawing. And finally, I have a lot of resources here for you guys. So if you want to watch some of those videos, I really recommend this one, the How Do Birds Learn to Sing? That's the TED Ed video that's really nicely illustrated. And then this 7 stunning bird courtship displays is the one where I showed you some of the dances and things that you might be able to see. So if you're interested in looking into more of that, certainly feel free.